Hi everyone, this is Dan with Open Air Campaigners Bay Area, and this is Evangelism in Small Bites. For those of you who were here for our first couple of sessions, our first couple of videos, thank you, welcome back. It's good to see you, good to have you. For those of you who are not here, haven't watched the first couple of videos, I'd encourage you to go back and watch them before you go through the rest of this. The first video is going to be an introduction. We'll go over the outline of what we'll be covering in these lessons, and I talk a little bit about me, what my background is, and why you'd want to listen to me anyway. And then in session 1, we started with what I call foundational issues about sharing the gospel. Important principles that I think we need to understand before we start the evangelism process. So we're going to review those real quick, and then we will complete. We did some of those foundational issues. We're going to finish those today, and then we're going to go to the approach, how we approach people when we share the gospel with them. So, starting with the review here, foundational issues. Number 1, it is the gospel that is the power of God unto salvation. It is the gospel of Jesus Christ that saves, not us. We have the privilege of being used by God in this process, and we want to be persuasive when we're sharing the gospel, but it's the gospel that saves. It's a supernatural act of God, and we can't forget that. Romans 1:16 says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation." Second, this is a spiritual discipline. It's something that we have to discipline ourselves at. There is no secret, there's no magic bullet. It is hard work, but it is hard work that is well worth it. Third, it's a spiritual warfare. We can't minimize that. We may be contending with commonly misconstrued facts of our times and philosophies and things like that, but there is a spiritual aspect. Ephesians says that we strive not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And if you're going to be doing this, if you're going to be sharing the gospel, you need to be prayed up, and you need to be in the Word, and you need to be doing those things regularly. So, it is spiritual warfare. It is also a command. Every Christian, whether or not you've been called to full-time evangelistic ministry like me, every Christian has an obligation to share the gospel, to bring the message of Christ to those around them. It's not an option, it's a command. And finally, unbelief, this is very important, is not primarily an intellectual problem, though people may have sincere intellectual questions. It is a moral and spiritual problem. Because sin came into the world through Adam and Eve, we all have a natural predilection towards sin and a rebellious spirit that causes us by nature to turn away from God. And once again, that's why it's a spiritual issue. It takes a heart changed by God for somebody to come to faith in Him. So, not primarily intellectual, although there are intellectual aspects, but primarily spiritual and moral. So, next point, new for this week. Evangelism is not just about gospel knowledge, but about gospel fluency. It is a work of the Spirit, but it is also a learned skill. And like any learned skill, it's something that we really have to spend time at if we're going to do it well. It takes practice and regular practice. I'll give you an example. I'm trying to learn to speak Spanish. My area, I'm in the Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. Very heavy Hispanic population, a lot of Spanish speakers. Some English is not their first language, and some they can't speak English at all. So I want to learn the language so that I can witness to those people too. I've been practicing with a program on my phone, and I've got an audiobook that I've been listening to, and I've picked up a number of phrases and stuff. I know enough to be dangerous. I can go to the donut shop in the morning and pick up my donut and my cup of coffee, and I can order them in Spanish. And the lady who works there is very patient with me and my mispronunciations, but she gets the basic gist. However, can I take the ability to order a coffee and donut and take that information to Spain or to Mexico and be able to get along well in that language, just basic day-to-day tasks? No, I can't. Now, I'm getting better as time goes on. I'm learning more, But if I really wanted to integrate into that society, into one of those two societies, it would take time and practice before I was fluent. The same's true when we're sharing the gospel. If we're going to get good, um, if we're going to be able to share the gospel smoothly, get all the basics in there, not lose our place. And when you share the gospel, you can't think of it as an outline where you just go through the points in order and everything fits. I mean, that would be nice. We will be giving you an outline. We will be giving you an order of gospel presentation that will be very helpful for you. But gospel conversations don't always go that way. You know, sometimes you may start at the beginning and say there's 10 points. You start at point 1 to point 2, and then there's a sidebar, and you end up at point 5 and 6, and then you have to go back to point 3 and 4, and things don't always go in order. Things are not always that simple. If you've got somebody that maybe you're witnessing to at work or a family member, you may not get through all the points of the gospel in one conversation. You're going to have an idea where you can jump back in. Those kind of things means you have to be fluent in all the basics of the gospel so that you can adjust as you go. So that's going to take practice. And this is why I often tell people, even people that are not called to public evangelistic ministry, that they should spend time in street ministry, in a public place, reaching out to people that you don't know. Because number one, it's going to help you. It's going to help you get your sea legs, get the practice that you need. And you're doing the evangelism with people who don't have a direct connection with you. And not to sound like I'm taking it too lightly, but if somebody walks up to you on the street or in a shopping center or something, you share the gospel, and they say, "You're a nut. I don't know what the heck you're talking about. I don't care. I'm walking away now." Yeah, it's a little embarrassing. It's going to hurt a little bit. You don't really lose anything. You don't have to see this person again, most likely. They're going to do their thing. You're going to do yours. Now, wouldn't you rather make your mistakes on someone who doesn't have a close relationship with you, so you're better prepared when a family member or a close friend, when the opportunity to share with them opens up? Absolutely. I have much more to lose there. In fact, sometimes family members are the toughest people to witness to. Once again, I want to emphasize, I'm not minimizing anybody's importance. Every soul matters to God, and we need to take every evangelistic opportunity very seriously. But still, if you're going to be in the tough situations, wouldn't you rather have some practice first? So, street evangelism, getting together with a missionary in your area, is one of those ways that you can gain that gospel fluency, which is a very valuable thing. Next, there will be conflict when you're in evangelism. Generally not physical conflict, but emotional conflict, intellectual conflict, spiritual conflict. The spirit world is real, and the enemy does not want us to succeed at this. But the greatest conflict you will experience is not going to be the intellectual arguments with the other person or even the spirit realm. The greatest conflict that you are going to have is with your own flesh. Fear is real. There's even reason for fear. The spiritual issues are one of them. Another one is people have questions. What if I'm sharing the gospel with somebody and something goes wrong? What if something bad happens? They get angry, they hate me, they walk away. What if I say the wrong thing and trip over my tongue? What if there are questions that I can't answer? And those are legitimate fears, and all of those things are going to happen. But remember, our responsibility, our calling by God, is to step out in faith, even when it's not easy, to share His truth. And it's not supposed to be easy all the time. I mean, Jesus said that we are to take up our cross and follow Him. A cross, a big, heavy wooden instrument of torture and death. Why would you expect it to be easy? It wasn't easy on Jesus. And He was God incarnate. is God incarnate. So it's going to be a struggle, but we need to trust God, and we need to step out in faith, and we need to pray that He will help us overcome the fear of man, even when we don't succeed, or when we don't think that we're going to succeed. And that gets on to our next point, which I think is so important, and that is, when we talk about succeeding in evangelism, what does that look like? Is success in evangelism getting somebody to come to church with you? Is it that person wanting to repeat a prayer or falling down on their knees saying, "What must I do to be saved?" It's none of those things. Success in evangelism is one word: faithfulness. Remember, evangelism is a supernatural work of God. It's not our responsibility to get someone saved. Yes, we should be persuasive. We should try to give them a sense of urgency about their soul. Those are good things. We should study to show ourselves approved so that we have good answers. But success in evangelism is about us being faithful to God's call. And whether you're someone who has spent years and years trying to learn more about Scripture and learn more about apologetics and learn about persuasively speaking to people, or whether you just came to Christ and want to share with your family and have very little knowledge, don't let that stop you. Choose to be obedient to God, be faithful, and trust God with the results. And then as those struggles come in, as those questions you don't know come in, go back and study to show yourself approved, as the gospel, as the Bible says. And God will honor that, and over time, He will make those things easier. You'll have more of those answers. So again, take that weight off your shoulders. It doesn't depend on you. It won't be your fault if somebody goes to hell. It will be their responsibility. It will be their standing before God. All right? So success is faithfulness. So those are our foundational points. Now let's talk a little bit about the approach. What's a good way and what's a bad way to talk to somebody? First, we talked about having an outline and being able to lay out the gospel, but don't think about giving a presentation. Have a chat with somebody. Have a conversation. Don't just walk through an outline. People, if you just want to back somebody into a corner, people can feel that. It won't feel sincere. It won't feel like you care about them. And they're not going to be likely to listen. Let me give you an example. This is from my own life. A number of years ago, when I lived in a different spot than I did now, I was living in an apartment shortly after my wife and I got married. And a lady came to the door. I can't recall off the top of my head the group that she was with. It is a cultic group. Some of you will probably remember. Put it in the comments. They believe in a father God and a mother God. I want to say Moonies. That might be right. Anyway, she came to the door and she started going into her presentation. And she had all the points lined out in 1, 2, 3, 4. And I told her, wait a minute, can I answer you on this? Can I respond to something you said? Finally, I got a word in edgewise, and her response was, okay. Literally did that. Put her head down to one side, looked at the floor, clearly not listening to anything that I had said, and then, as soon as I stopped talking, immediately took off where she had left off. In one ear and out the other. We don't want to be that person. We want there to be back and forth. We want there to be good conversation. We want to hear where this person is coming from. Not only is it respectful, but it will give us insight into the best ways to talk to them and to share Christ and to apply gospel truths to problems that they're having. And that's very important. People can tell when you're just talking to talk rather than talking to listen. People matter. This is a person with a soul created in the image of God. We need to take it seriously, and we need to really care about that person. 1 Peter 3:15, you probably know the verse. Always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have, but with gentleness and respect. And if that respect isn't there, and if that gentleness isn't there, people can tell, and they're not going to want to listen to you. So, have a conversation. Don't just go through an outline with people. Second, don't use churchy language. Christians have their own language. We're not the only ones. Other religions do. Different interest groups out there in society have their own keywords that they use that people outside the group aren't necessarily going to understand, and we certainly have our own language. We don't want to use churchy or religious sounding language. Not that we exclude important theological terms. We may have to take time and break things down and explain them to people in ways that they understand. But if you use language that is too heavy with religious presuppositions, I guess is a way to put it, then it's not going to make sense to other people. For instance, if you were to walk up to somebody on the street and say, "Hey brother, are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?" If you have any kind of church background, you know what that means. But we're coming into a time when fewer and fewer people have a church background. For someone who doesn't understand anything about Christianity, that sounds weird at best and creepy at worst. Those words don't have the meaning that we pour into them for somebody from the outside. So that's not a good place to start. Every one of those concepts is important, but we need to break them down and explain them so the other person isn't confused. Churchy language often confuses people. So just talk normally. Take theological concepts, put them into normal words so that the other person can understand them. And this is going to take work. You need to be role-playing gospel presentations in your head. As you're praying or as you're reading the Bible, as you're driving in your car, and think about how you're going to express these things. You do that with other things in your life. How you're going to handle conversations, how you're going to deal with stuff at work. You think things over ahead of time and you mentally prepare yourself. How often do you do that regarding evangelism? You need to. So don't use churchy language. Use normal language and think about how you can explain religious concepts, Christian concepts to people. Next, on the approach, keep your focus on God, not you. A big thing that people like to do is to give their personal testimony. Personal testimonies can be a wonderful thing if they're done right. And people can really connect with you if they understand where you're coming from emotionally. That's good. That can be very good. But I've heard a lot of testimonies that end up being, look how horrible I was before, it's about me. Look what I did, it's about me, with a little bit of help from God. I don't think people intend to express it that way. Some probably do. Most people don't intend to express it that way, but that's the way it comes across. And that can lead to legalism. Look what I did, so God was pleased with me. If you do these things, God will be pleased with you too. That's not evangelism. That's not where the focus can be. We need to focus on God, on God's goodness, on God's sovereignty, on the reality of God's justice, how we deserve it, and how what God did so that we could be brought to peace with Him. Keep the focus on God, not on self. You don't want to stray into legalism. So once again, we talked about reviewing here. Have a conversation. Don't just make a presentation. Don't use churchy language. Keep the focus on God. And here's an important one. Stop trying to win. You're not in a contest. This is a soul that matters to God. This is not a fight. It's not a contest. This can be difficult. I struggle with this because I love the intellectual back and forth. I love the mental sparring. That's fun for me. And then some other people just, darn it, I'm right about this, and you should know I'm right about this, and it should be clear, and I'm going to keep browbeating you until you give in. No. That's not what our goal needs to be. Jeff Durbin, a good apologist, I encourage you to watch his videos on YouTube. He is very kind and gentle when he shares with people on the street very often, and he's a great one to emulate. He says, win the person, not the argument. That's a very wise thing to say. There are a lot of, I have people now that I have had the privilege of talking to a dozen or more times on the street. I've got an atheist that doesn't live that far from me. And we've had some pretty intense conversations. But I'm trying to look at the long term. And we have, even through a lot of contentious conversations, we've managed to keep it polite. And he lives not that far from me, and he'll frequently just give me a text and say, hey, I'm taking my kid to the park. Do you want to come over and talk? And it's always about spiritual issues. We become friends too, but that's always been the focus of our relationship. And I think part of the reason that that has happened is because I tried to care about him as a person, care about his struggles and his questions. And so we've been able to build a relationship. This is not friendship evangelism where it's all about being friends to the person and just doing nice things for them. And that is something that happens a lot these days. The gospel is first in this relationship. That's where it started, and that's where it has continued. But I'm still trying to treat him as someone with value and dignity, created in the image of God, because that's the truth. So we need to remember that when we're talking to anyone. Stop trying to win the argument and try to win the person. And that is the kind of thing that can lead to further communication, further opportunities to witness to them, and maybe they will have a different impression about what Christians are like when they talk to other believers and when other people have a chance to share Christ with them. So anyways, lots of thoughts there. I'm going to go ahead and sign off for today on this. If you have questions, comments, feedback, go ahead and drop them down in the comments section below. I will do my best to answer them in a timely manner, and you may even hear some of your questions addressed on our next episode. If you have additional questions, want to reach out to me directly, want to find out more about the ministry that I'm part of and what I do, or even to support me, you can go to my website. That's going to be www.yoursoulmatters, because it does, .org. And you can reach me there, or you can email me at dan@yoursoulmatters.org. So again, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was encouraging to you. Hope to hear from you, and I hope to see you in our next episode. God bless. Have a great day.